Please welcome to the stage Vice President and Chief Foundation Officer of the Human Rights Campaign, Jeff Krehely.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm really honored today to have the privilege of moderating this panel that you're going to hear from right now. The three women who will be joining me have done so much to advance LGBT equality, legal equality, and often behind the scenes and out of the spotlight. But so many of the advances that we've made in the last 6 years or so at the federal level are thanks to their hard work and the hard work of their colleagues. So we're really honored and privileged to have about an hour or so to spend with them and hear from them about some of the work they're doing and how it particularly impacts LGBTQ youth and those of you who are working with them on a regular basis. So first, we're honored to have Karlan Lahmon here. She's on our panel today. She's the Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Education. President Obama nominated her for this position, and she was unanimously confirmed by the Senate in August 2013. Before joining the department, Lahmon was Director of Impact Litigation at Public Counsel, the nation's largest pro bono law firm. Before that, she practiced for a decade at the ACLU of Southern California, including serving as Assistant Legal Director. She has received numerous awards during her career, including being named one of California's top women litigators in 2010 and 2007. She received her JD from Yale Law School, where she was the Outstanding Woman Law Graduate. Please welcome Karlan to the stage. Also joining our panel today is Pam Karlan, who serves as a Deputy Assistant Attorney General in the Civil Rights Division of the United States Department of Justice, where she oversees the division's voting and employment litigation sections and its Office of Special Counsel for Unfair Immigration-Related Employment Practices. From 2012 and 2013, she served as part of the legal team representing Edith Windsor before the Supreme Court in the case that overturned the Defense of Marriage Act. And now at the DOJ, she works in the department's Windsor implementation team to end legal discrimination against same-sex married couples. Before coming to the Justice Department, she worked for NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund and taught at Stanford Law School. Please welcome Pam to the stage. And last, but certainly not least, we're joined by Jocelyn Samuels. She is the director of the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Office for Civil Rights, where she leads their work to ensure non-discrimination and equity in federal health and human services. She also enforces laws to protect the privacy and security of medical information and health records. Ms. Samuels was previously the Acting Assistant Attorney General for Civil Rights at the United States Department of Justice, where she managed the operations of the Civil Rights Division. At the DOJ, she led efforts to protect the Voting Rights Act of 1965, worked to reform city police departments across the country, oversaw the prosecution of hate crimes under the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act, and worked to prevent housing, lending, and employment discrimination. She received her law degree from Columbia University, where she was the notes editor of the Law Review. Please welcome Jocelyn to the stage. And I'm going to do my best not to fall off this stool because I'm not the most coordinated and graceful person in the world. So forgive me if I fall. So I really want to thank the three of you for being here this weekend, coming all the way from DC on Valentine's Day, no less. It is about 5 degrees in DC with a really wicked wind chill, so maybe there is a little incentive for sunshine. But nonetheless, we were very, very honored and thankful for you to be here. We're going to open with some remarks from the panelists, so we're going to kick it over to them and give 1 or 2 minutes of your opening statements, and then we'll do some Q&A. How about that?
Great, thank you, Jeff. Thanks so much for the introductions, and thank you for bringing all of us in this room together to be here as Valentines to each other. I really think that that's really appropriate for us. The work that we do, and I'm so honored to share the stage with my friends in the civil rights struggle and the federal government, the work that we do together honors the principles that are basic to any loving relationship. There should be fairness, there should be respect, we should treat each other with equality. So I think that today is the right day for us to be talking about how we together can thrive. My office was created about 50 years ago to enforce what President Kennedy called the simple justice, that federal funds should not be used to discriminate. And we take that charge extremely seriously. We are aggressive in our satisfaction of that principle in our policy statements as well as in the enforcement work that we do. And I just want to give a quick highlight of both areas. In the policy work, a few years ago we put out guidance reminding schools that they cannot let hostile environments exist and perpetuate them for our LGBTQ students. We have more recently twice put out guidance that reminds our schools that Title IX protects our transgender students in addition to all of our students against gender-based discrimination. Thank you. I'm delighted by the applause, and I'm also really saddened that we have to be happy that we said it, because that has been true since 1972 when Title IX was enacted. More recently, we have entered into enforcement agreements with districts, and I'm just going to tell one story, but I want to start by saying that it's a pretty ugly story. My other stories are also pretty ugly, but it's a reminder about why we need to do this work. We received a complaint from a mom about her son and students like her son having been harassed in his school district in Florida, having been called terrible names, having been told that he needed to act more like a boy, that he was being too girly. When that mom came to us, her son had tried to take his life the spring before she came to us, and he is now in a vegetative state. So it's a particularly egregious set of facts for him. I can't give him his life back before that happened, but I can ensure, we have ensured, that no other student in that district, and that district serves nearly 70,000 students, no other student in that district will have to go through what he went through. We investigated, the district told the mom that they didn't know that he had been treated that way, but our investigation revealed that they did know. He had told his teacher, and his teacher had told him he should act more like a man. His teacher had ignored what he had said. So that district now has to train all of their teachers. They now have guidance from us. They now have new policies and procedures in practice, and so no other student should be treated the way that he was treated. But it is too late in our history for us to be having those kinds of conversations, for our students to be living that way in school. We need to change.
Thank you. Pam?
Roses are red, violets are blue. I'm so delighted and honored to be here with you. I'm just sentimental. What can I say? I know that we're going in the kind of questions that Jeff is going to ask us to be talking about LGBTQ youth, and so I thought in my opening remarks I would focus on the fact that one of our goals, of course, is for all of these kids to grow up, and to grow up to be full, productive, happy, healthy members of society. So I thought what I would do in the opening remarks is talk to you a little bit about the things that the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division is doing for adults. And then we'll turn back to kids. So the first thing is everybody needs a place to live. And our housing and civil enforcement section is busy now trying to ensure fair treatment of, for example, transgender people in housing. We've brought cases involving transgender women who were told in the community they lived in that they could not dress in gender-appropriate clothing for themselves, and who were ultimately evicted, and we got a settlement for them in which they were able to move to another community that was more accepting of who they were. We are monitoring a case currently that involves also our colleagues at the Department of Education, involving a college that refuses to allow a transgender male student to live in a male dormitory here in Oregon. Everybody needs a job. Our employment litigation section enforces Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which, among other things, prohibits discrimination on the basis of sex. The department recently filed its first 2 statements of interest arguing that transgender individuals are protected against sex discrimination, both under a theory that says that you can't discriminate against people because they don't conform to gender stereotypes, and more recently, under the theory that discrimination against transgender people is discrimination on the basis of sex simply because they're transgender. It doesn't matter whether the employer thinks that they are behaving in an appropriate or inappropriate way. Transgender people are protected. Everybody wants to be safe. The Civil Rights Division's criminal section enforces the provisions of the Shepard-Byrd Hate Crimes Act, which marks its 5th anniversary this year. We've engaged in vigorous prosecutions across the country of hate crimes against LGBT individuals. And we're engaged in trainings across the country for police departments so they understand how to deal with victims of crimes that may have been committed against people on the basis of their sexual orientation, their gender identity, or perceptions about what their sexual orientation or gender identity is. And of course, as you know, many people when they grow up want to marry. And of course, many people who want to marry actually find somebody who wants to marry them, which is great as well. And so the Civil Rights Division is involved in marriage equality work. We were involved in the Perry and Windsor cases that the Supreme Court decided a couple of years ago. And members of the Civil Rights Division's team have been key players in the Windsor implementation task force within the Department of Justice, which has been involved in dismantling the effects of over 1,100 federal laws on same-sex married couples, something for which we received the Attorney General's highest award last year. So that's what we're doing for old people, and we'll turn to what we're doing for young people in a moment.
I don't know if Jocelyn's going to have poetry to open, but
yeah, believe me, it would not be a kindness to anyone for me to open with a poem. And I do have to thank Pam for refraining from pointing out as she was talking about old people that I am the oldest person on this panel, which she has pointed out to me in private on many occasions. Anyway, I am really delighted to be here and really want to thank HRC and NEA and the American Counseling Association for organizing this wonderful conference. It is terrific to be here with all of you, and I second Catherine's remarks that there's no better place to be on Valentine's Day than with people who are trying to live the principles that underlie Valentine's Day and other holidays: love, respect, dignity, equality, and opportunity. And I feel so lucky that I get to help in that effort at the Department of Health and Human Services. As Jeff said, I head the Office for Civil Rights there, which enforces laws that ban discrimination by entities that HHS funds, so hospitals, providers, insurance companies, state welfare agencies, child care centers. So we are analogous to the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, but in the healthcare universe. And as Thomas has recognized, it is really important to ensure that people do not suffer discrimination when they seek healthcare or coverage through insurance. It is critical to our health and to our future as a nation that people be able to get the health care and the human services that they need without regard to race or national origin or disability or religion or sex. And that is one of the very good things that has happened in the last 5 years was the enactment of the Affordable Care Act, which we will celebrate its 5th anniversary this spring as well. The Affordable Care Act, as you know, provides many important benefits for people who have been previously uninsured. And my boss, the Secretary of HHS, would fire me if I did not remind people that tomorrow is the last day of open enrollment. So please, if you are not insured, this is an opportunity to get the coverage you need to protect your health. And of particular note to me in my role as Director of the Office for Civil Rights, the ACA includes a non-discrimination provision, Section 1557, which for the very first time bars sex discrimination in health coverage, health insurance, and health care. We have been actively enforcing that law since it was enacted in 2010, and one of the things that we have done is to make clear that the prohibition of sex discrimination under that law includes a prohibition of discrimination based on gender identity. Indeed, we have gotten numerous complaints from transgender individuals who have suffered often horrifying mistreatment in the medical care system. And I encourage you, if you feel like you have been subject to discrimination based on sex, whether it is sex stereotyping or gender identity or the people you love, to come and tell your story to us, because hearing about those stories enables us to give concrete meaning to the guarantees of the law. Another thing that we are doing is working on a proposed regulation to ensure that we can enshrine interpretations of the anti-discrimination laws so that their standards will apply beyond the contours of any particular complaint. And so stay tuned for more information on that. But I will look forward to our further discussion and to your questions. I'm so happy to be here, and I really thank Jeff for giving us this opportunity.
Thank you all. So the first question that I have is for Pam. Most of the people attending this conference are teachers, social workers, and other professionals who are working on a day-to-day basis with LGBTQ youth. Exactly. But a big concern is often that they're in workplaces, administrations, they have supervisors who aren't necessarily supportive of that kind of engagement and that kind of advocacy for LGBTQ youth. So I guess two questions. First, in these cases, what kinds of federal protections can these youth-serving professionals, kind of direct the LGBTQ youth towards if they're not able to take an active role because of those other environmental factors? And another question is, what federal protections exist for the teachers and others who are working with youth and want to be allies, but again are having a struggle based on their supervisors or where they're working?
So the first thing, I guess, to kind of echo something that Catherine was just muttering up here on the stage is,
Catherine does not mutter.
Sotto voce. Sotto voce. I want to salute you for the work that you're doing. Sometimes merely standing up for people makes a huge difference, and one of the things that some of you may know is about the social science literature on this that shows that when they try to do these experiments on conformity, to see whether people can be made to conform to odd beliefs and the like, just having one ally in the room often makes a huge difference to people's willingness to stand up for what they know to be right. And so by standing up for and telling students who come to you with problems that they are not alone and that they're right, being that ally to them can make a huge difference to how they experience their world. So I just want to salute you for that and say, keep on doing what you're doing. That is, telling people that they are not crazy, that they have rights, that they're doing the right thing, backing up their allies among the student body. That can be critical as well. If you're an English teacher, I want to recommend that you read and talk about in your class a poem by Marge Percy called The Low Road that is about building coalitions and standing up. So read that poem to your class and talk about it. The second thing I want to note, and maybe Catherine will have something she wants to say about this as well, is the list of resources for students themselves who face discrimination in schools. Now, the primary statutory ones are Title IV and Title IX. Title IV of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and Title IX of the Civil Rights Act, Equal Education Opportunity Act of 1972. They prohibit sex discrimination in schools that receive federal money, which is basically any public school in the country, and a number of private universities and private schools as well. Both Catherine's office and our Education Opportunities section receive complaints under these statutes when students claim that they've been discriminated against. And this discrimination can be on the basis of sex stereotyping. It can be on the basis of unfair treatment of girls versus boys. So keep that in mind. OCR has somewhat broader authority to investigate under its statute than we do, but both of us can investigate and both of us can enforce. In addition to that, the Department of Justice can participate in private litigation. So if you know that a student in your school district is bringing a lawsuit under Title IX or is complaining under other civil rights statutes, you should tell them to let the federal government know, to let the Department of Justice know, and to let the Department of Education know. In addition to those statutory prohibitions, I want to remind you also about the First Amendment to the Constitution, which is about free speech. And students have free speech rights. They do not check them at the door of the school. So it's good for students to speak up when they see discrimination, and they are protected there. Now about you, and what about the protections for you if you're backing up a student? Well, the anti-retaliation provisions of Title IX protect people who complain about discrimination or who protest what they reasonably believe to be discrimination against adverse consequences, like, for example, being disciplined or transferred to another school or the like. And the leading case in this area was about a male coach, a male African-American coach at a high school who complained about the treatment of white girls on a sports team. So you are protected whether or not you are LGBTQ if you protest about discrimination that you reasonably believe violates federal law. And so that's the first thing to keep in mind, that protection. The second thing, obviously, to keep in mind is the protections that you have if you are in a school district that grants tenure and the like. So you should keep in mind that you have protections beyond just the protections that federal law gives you. You have protections under state law. And the last thing that I'll mention, although this is a kind of complicated issue in a way, is you have First Amendment protections. There's a long history of school teachers and other professionals making public problems that they see with the way schools are operating. Now, I don't want to give you legal advice about this because it is a very complicated area of law, but I will just say that the Supreme Court has continued over the years to recognize what it calls the considerable value that encouraging speech by public employees on issues of public concern can have. And the leading case in this area for years and years and years was a case about a school teacher who protested the way that the school budget was being managed in a letter to the editor of the newspaper. So keep in mind that you do have protections under the First Amendment as well, but be careful on this and consult either a union representative or a lawyer before you go too far out on a limb in protesting yourself, unless what you do is protest to the federal government, because then you're protected by the anti-retaliation provisions as well. I hope that wasn't like too much law for
That was some fine
Valentine's
print. That
Day.
was like the fine print at the end of the commercial.
Well, you know, the thing is, whenever you ask a lawyer a question, at the end of the day, the answer to the question is, it depends. So...
Okay, but the one thing I would want to add to that is that this part doesn't depend. You can file a complaint with the Office for Civil Rights, and we will investigate. And so if there's a concern about whether you've been retaliated against for standing up for students based on LGBT status, you can come to us, and we would investigate that. So and you or your students can come to us on that issue.
And I would just add, I think that you can tell that we are all really good friends. We work together on a daily basis, even if we do have to come to Portland, Oregon to actually see each other in person. But to the extent that we're throwing around names of laws or telling you to go to one office or another, don't worry too much about figuring this out for yourself. If you come to any government agency, we will make sure that you get to the right place. So it's our job as lawyers to figure out what kinds of claims you might have under the law, and we call each other all the time. Pam is usually calling me to insult me, but you know, that's just...
I feel like I need to step in for Pam here.
I don't even know what to say.
That's a first, isn't it? And Pam is my husband's boss, so I should probably be careful there. So, happy Valentine's Day, sweetie.
Yeah, so you're especially glad to learn about the anti-retaliation provision.
Absolutely. Okay, let's bring this back. Okay, Catherine. Getting back on track here, thinking about the existing policies and laws and rules that are in place to protect LGBTQ youth, can you talk about those, and especially Title IX and how that actually does play out for protecting trans-identified students, gender nonconforming students, especially in places where state and local law might not be providing, you know, a solid coverage for folks?
Sure. As I mentioned when I started, we have now multiple times put out guidance that reminds our schools, our communities, our families that Title IX does protect all students, including transgender students. And we have been actively, aggressively enforcing in this space as well. main principle that is very clear is that where a person in school, out of school, is being discriminated against for perceptions about gender nonconformity, Title IX does prohibit that. The kinds of resolution agreements that we have entered into, sometimes with our colleagues at the Department of Justice and sometimes on our own, have ranged among a variety of types. I'll tell you a few stories just so I can concretize what it is that the law does provide and what kind of work we do. One of our offices had a complaint come in to us from a 14-year-old boy, and it was pretty surprising to me that he came in on his own without an advocate, without a parent, having found the Office for Civil Rights. And he said that he had wanted to play on the soccer team at his school, and his coach had told everyone on the soccer team that no one would be cut because they had so few players. But then the coach cut him because he had been born a girl. And so the coach said, "You can't play." That student is now playing on the soccer team at his school and on 3 other sports at his school. We had to facilitate an agreement with the school to recognize that he had a right to play, and also to go to the athletic league in the school district to make sure that the athletic league would recognize his right to play and his right to participate as against other students in competitive sports. So I'm really excited about the resolution for that student and distressed that we had to be investigating it. We also have entered into resolution agreements for students who were being disciplined at their schools. One student's school disciplined her because she was wearing makeup, because she was dressing like a girl, because she had been born a boy. And so the school and school district were saying to her that you cannot perform your gender that way at this school. She now can. The school has undergone training. They are supporting the student going forward, and we're really excited about that. We entered into another resolution agreement for a student who had, this we did together with the Department of Justice, where the student's school had said that the student had to use a particular bathroom in the nurse's office and couldn't use any of the sex-specific bathrooms at the school because she's a girl, but the school recognized her as a boy, and so wouldn't treat her consistent with her gender identity. They now do, and she's able to use any restroom at the school and is fully participant in the school activities. So they run a pretty broad range. I gave you 3 examples that are in the K-12 space. We're also doing this in higher ed. We are receiving complaints that come in a variety of areas. I'm distressed about the kinds and scope of the discrimination that we are hearing about and that we are finding in our investigations, and we're trying to be very explicit, both in our guidance and in our resolution agreements and in speaking like this, putting out the information about what it is that the law requires and what we expect to see in our schools, so that we can see less discrimination and more satisfaction of students' educational rights going forward.
Great. Thank you. And Jocelyn, I actually had a little note to myself to remind people about open enrollment, because I'm a big fan of the Affordable Care Act, so thank you for hitting that right in the beginning. I expected no less. I would like to talk a little bit more about Section 1557, and a lot of us in DC who are policy nerds like me talk about 1557 a lot, but a lot of times people don't really know what that actually means in practice. So could you talk to us a little bit more? I know you already did, you touched on it a bit. What are the new protections that actually exist for LGBTQ people, especially youth, but we can include adults again as well, that exist today that weren't there previously? I think it's really important for people to understand the real bright line that's drawing.
Well, prior to enactment of Section 1557, there were prohibitions on race and national origin and disability discrimination in the healthcare sphere, but there was no prohibition on sex discrimination. So this is a really transformative law in terms of ensuring equality of treatment by healthcare providers, by hospitals, by insurers, by healthcare clearinghouses, by nurses, by dentists, by any kind of medical professional, to ensure that people are not subject to discrimination on the basis of their sex. So let me tell you about some of the kinds of complaints we've either received or heard about, so that you can understand a little more about the nature of conduct that may be discriminatory. We found, for example, we got a complaint that a man who had been subject to domestic violence went to the hospital to seek treatment and was roundly mocked and abused when he was there for being a male victim of domestic violence. That is a violation of the law. it rests on stereotypes about who is a victim of domestic violence, and no one can be denied care on that basis. And the hospital has now changed its procedures and trained its staff so that they understand that all victims of domestic violence have to be treated in equal and competent ways. We got another complaint from a woman who came in to say that she had been forced on a form in a doctor's office to list her husband as the payment guarantor for her bills, and that she suspected that the medical practice didn't make that same obligation for men who came in and who didn't have to list their wives as guarantors of their payments. That turned out to be the case, and that medical practice has now changed its policy. With regard to LGBTQ rights and people who have claimed discrimination, we have heard really troubling stories. For example, you may all have read about this, that there was a transgender woman who was involved in a serious car accident. Paramedics arrived to start treatment and withdrew it when they discovered that she was transgender, and instead allowed her to lie on the road and mocked her until ultimately she died. At trial that was brought by private counsel, her experts said that she would have had an 84 to 86% chance of surviving had she gotten adequate care at the scene. So that is just a horrifying example of the kinds of conduct that are now prohibited under the law. Similarly, we heard a story about a transgender man who went in to get treatment for cervical cancer and could not find a medical professional who was prepared to provide him that care. He ultimately died 2 years later, having finally found a medical professional who would treat him, but having discovered that by that point the cancer had metastasized in ways that were no longer treatable. So those kinds of really horrifying, literally life and death scenarios are ones that my office now has the tools to address. And I hope that none of you in this room are subjected to or even become aware of those kinds of horrific incidents. But please, if you do, let us know, because we can help. In addition, if you find that your students or the people you counsel or people who you hear about in the neighborhood are subject to harassment or refused treatment or declined coverage under an insurance policy, those are the kinds of things that we can deal with, and I do encourage you to be in touch with our office.
Thank you. Pam, I want to talk a little bit, get your thoughts about things like law enforcement and the juvenile justice system. I think a lot of us know that there's kind of a chain reaction of events that could happen to LGBTQ youth related to family rejection, bullying, extra, discipline to them for if they're, fighting back to defend themselves, that gets them into touch with the juvenile justice system, with the police force. What are some things that the Justice Department is doing to, kind of ensure that LGBTQ youth are treated as fairly as possible, given those circumstances that often get them in those situations?
Yeah, so I think we have a kind of what I think of as a threefold or three-pronged attack on this. The first is about schools themselves, because the most critical thing in keeping kids out of the juvenile justice system and the problems that we see there is keeping them in school, because kids who are in school are far less likely to end up in the juvenile justice system to begin with. And so there are two things that we're trying to do in that first prong of keeping kids in school. One of them is to deal with the bullying issue, because one of the biggest problems is kids who don't want to go to school because they don't feel safe and they don't feel respected at the schools they're at. And so here we've been working a lot, as Catherine was suggesting earlier, we've been doing a lot of cooperative work between the Educational Opportunity section of the Civil Rights Division and the Office of Civil Rights. And I'll just mention a couple of the other things that we've been doing, which are not just about protecting an individual student, but trying to seek systematic change in school systems where these problems crop up. So we had a settlement in Arcadia, California, which is a 10,000 student school system. The event that triggered this was a transgender middle school student who wasn't able to use the bathroom that he wanted to use in his school and wasn't allowed to go on school-sponsored field trips because, you know, the kids stay overnight and they couldn't decide, like, what kind of room would he stay in overnight and the like. And so we've solved the problem for him, but of course, when we come into a school district, we want to do more than just solve the problem for an individual student. And so as part of the settlement of that case, the school system agreed to review and revise the procedures that it has on dealing with these issues. It specifically includes gender-based discrimination as a form of sex discrimination, so gender identity is covered by their training now. They train the faculty and the folks who deal with students in the school to treat them all fairly. They provide all students in the school with equal access to all of the facilities in the school, regardless of gender and identity and the like. And we've done these kinds of anti-harassment and anti-bullying settlements in places across the country, because it's really important to get the schools to understand that the policies they have to include anti-harassment and anti-bullying for LGBTQ students. In addition to that, of course, we look at whether schools are unfairly disciplining students on the basis of sex, because it's a twofold problem, right? One thing is you want to protect kids who are LGBTQ against being bullied and against being driven out of the schools. And the second thing is you want to protect them in the way the schools discipline students so that they're not being unfairly disciplined. So that's the kind of first prong, is keep the kids in schools and you will solve a lot of the downstream problems. The second thing is about law enforcement, and you're probably all aware that of the analog to driving while black, which is walking while transgender. Police harassment of folks on the street because of gender identity and the like, and we are working on this issue as well. We have another section of the Civil Rights Division called the Special Litigation Section, which has a statute with even more numbers in it than 1557. It's a statute called 14141. It is a statute that allows the Civil Rights Division to go in and deal with law enforcement agencies that have a pattern or practice of discriminating against the individuals they are supposed to be serving. And we have brought a series of these cases across the country. The thing that most people are watching the most, of course, is the way we've been bringing these cases about unjustified shootings of individuals' mental health problems, like Albuquerque was one that's been covered a lot recently. You may have seen some stuff about Cleveland in the papers recently. And there are a host of investigations going on around the country. But one of the things we do in these investigations, in addition to dealing with the racial discrimination that occurs, is dealing with discrimination and harassment by law enforcement against people on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity as well. And so in a lot of the cases that we've resolved recently, in cases in Puerto Rico, in cases in New Orleans and the like, one of the things we've done is required training of officers to prevent discrimination against people on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity or gender expression. And when we do these cases across the country, even if the thing that brings us into a case is race discrimination, we always do outreach to the LGBT community in the place where we're going to make sure that we address issues that are of importance to them. And these are obviously of tremendous importance to kids, because a lot of kids, especially kids who are out on the street, are going to interact with law enforcement all the time, and we want to make sure that they're treated fairly and they're treated with respect. And the third piece of this is in the juvenile justice system, where unfortunately for a wide variety of reasons, a lot of LGBTQ kids end up. Here, the special litigation section also is enforcing this statute called 14141 about systematic discrimination. And we have a special focus here also on the Prison Rape Elimination Act, because one of the worst things that happens is, especially for transgender kids, they're often sexually abused either by other kids in the system or sometimes even by the guards who are supposed to be preventing this. And so we have prosecuted prison officials. I was having lunch the other day with one of the folks from our criminal section who was talking about one of the most satisfying cases he dealt with was a case where they prosecuted the guards in a lockup who allowed a transgender teenager who was picked up basically for driving too fast to be repeatedly raped. And so these people who did not protect him were ultimately tried and convicted and sentenced to prison. And what the prosecutor said to me about the case was that he thought that the prosecution did a lot to restore this young man's faith that the government and society care about what happens to him and want to protect him. And the last thing I'll say about this juvenile justice system piece of things is that we've also been focusing in the special litigation section on questions about the medical care that's provided to LGBT inmates who often have a variety of distinctive medical needs that come out of things like, for example, for transgender folks, there are a bunch of medical needs that they often have that have to be taken care of in the prison system. The Eighth Amendment to the Constitution forbids the government from being deliberately indifferent to the known medical needs of folks who are incarcerated. And then for kids who are HIV positive, they obviously also need a variety of medical care in the juvenile justice system that's distinctive. And we are monitoring and have been pushing hard on making sure that folks get the medical care that they need if they end up in juvenile justice facilities. So that's kind of, it's kind of three-pronged attack. Keep people in school, make sure that law enforcement treats them fairly, and if they are ultimately fairly arrested, convicted, and sent to some kind of incarceration facility, make sure that they're treated fairly and with dignity there as well.
Great, thank you. Catherine, I want to ask you about something that kind of pops up every now and then. There was a case in Mississippi, I think in the last month, where a gay-straight alliance was attempted to be formed, and the school suddenly changed their policy on clubs for students. Can you just talk a little bit about that phenomenon, how it happens, and what are the rights of the students in those situations, as well as the teachers who might want to be sponsors and supportive of that work?
Sure, thank you. On the phenomenon and how it happens, it shouldn't, but it is happening all too often. The Equal Access Act requires that schools treat all student-initiated clubs equally, and that includes gay-straight alliance clubs. So it's unlawful, and the Secretary of Education sent a letter to all schools reminding them that it is unlawful a few years ago. So you can do a Google search, take that letter to your administrators. You also can reach out to your Title IX coordinator at your school. Your Title IX coordinator should know that it's unlawful and should be a resource to you. And you can come to us at the Office for Civil Rights and file a complaint. There are multiple ways that denial of access for a gay-straight alliance club could also violate Title IX. If there is a hostile environment on a school campus and the GSA would be a way to mitigate that hostile environment, not allowing it to exist on the campus would violate Title IX. If the school is retaliating against students and staff for gender expression by failing to allow them to meet and participate in the GSA, that would violate Title IX. There are a number of ways that we also may be able to enforce to address the issue, but it's a very serious issue. GSAs do terrific work in schools. We really want there to be supportive spaces for our students in schools, and it's categorically inappropriate for any school setting to be saying that students can't find a place to be together and to talk and support each other at the school site.
Great, thank you. Jocelyn, for you, one of my last job at the Center for American Progress, we worked quite a bit with HHS, and we're just amazed by the wide range of LGBT related work that was going on there, often behind, completely under the radar, especially in the first term of the Obama administration. And so I just wanted to know if you could talk a little bit more about the broader work that the agency is doing to really enhance the health and well-being of LGBT populations.
No, I'd be happy to, and thank you for asking. As Jeff notes, there are numerous components of HHS that have done extensive work with the LGBTQ community in order to enhance health and human services to that community. One thing to be aware of is that we do have a coordinating council which is staffed at the highest levels of the department to ensure that LGBTQ issues are addressed and considered in policy initiatives across the board. But I'll just talk a little bit about a few things that the department has done and is continuing to do in order to meet its goals to provide healthcare and quality human services across the board. You're probably aware of our Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. They, along with the Family Acceptance Project, and I know that Caitlin Ryan is one of the honorees here, and has done wonderful work in this space, have put together a best practices resource guide for helping LGBTQ youth deal with family acceptance or rejection. That document is available on our website. I think it has a lot of helpful information about best practices in this area, and it's something that I would encourage you to check out. Our Administration on Children and Families, which deals with child welfare across the board, has done a significant amount of work in terms of outreach to the LGBTQ community and also ensuring that its standards for child welfare placements take account of the unique needs of this community, particularly with regard to unaccompanied minors. I'm sure you are all aware of the influx of undocumented children who have come across the border over the course of time, reaching a peak last summer. And ACF, the Administration on Children and Families, is responsible for placing those children and ensuring that they are given adequate care while their status is being determined. And they have done significant amounts of work to ensure that the homes and group settings where LGBTQ individuals and children are placed understand the unique vulnerabilities and needs of that community. The Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services has also issued a number of regulations that, for example, ban any kind of discrimination based on sexual orientation or gender identity or any other kind of basis in hospital visitation. Patients get to determine who they want to have come visit them, and a hospital cannot bar their self-selection. You should also be aware that CMS has regulations that bar discrimination based on, among other things, sexual orientation and gender identity in the marketplaces. So the marketplaces which serve to provide a gateway to insurance coverage are barred from discriminating on a host of bases. They also have a proposed rule that says that any hospital that receives either Medicare or Medicaid funding will be prohibited from discriminating, again, across a host of bases, including sexual orientation and gender identity. You've already heard some about the work of the Centers for Disease Control, and NIH, the National Institutes of Health, are doing extensive research on disparities in health outcomes and care that the LGBTQ community receive. We also are doing analyses of data collection across the department to ensure that we're capturing information that will enable us to both track health disparities and better target care to the LGBTQ community. So there are a lot of initiatives that are ongoing that I think are really designed to ensure that LGBTQ individuals, like every other individual in the country, get the care, the access to coverage, the human services that they so desperately need, and that it is the department's mission to provide.
Great, thank you. It's an impressive list, very impressive. I know folks are eager to get to their next round of workshops, and we're almost coming up on the hour. Unbelievably, that went by really fast. So I was wondering if kind of how we opened, if you all each could take a minute or two to just kind of give a final thought. And also, I think it'd be really important to let folks know, I think each of you have mentioned, if you see instances of discrimination that are happening in your schools and wherever you are working, to let folks know, let folks in the government know. What is the best way to actually do that? If you could kind of point people in a certain direction, because sometimes it's a little overwhelming to think, oh my God, how do I actually reach somebody at the Department of Justice or HHS or Ed? So that would be my closing request of the three of you.
Great, thank you. And I do want to say we've been sharing a lot of information. It was a little weedy in some places about how to get to what. I hope that the main take-home that you have from the three of us is we care, we have your back, the government is here to support you, your students, the work that you're doing in schools. It's incredibly exciting to me. Thank you. Thank you. It's incredibly exciting to me to look out to see all of you here together in partnership in person today, in partnership every day for the ways that you are delivering in schools. This is what we want for education. This is what we want for developing our future. We need to make sure that all of our kids in schools, all of our adults in schools are treated fairly and are safe. On the question about how you would get to us, we have 12 regional offices around the country. You can reach out to any of those offices. You can also go online, ocr.ed.gov, to be able to file a complaint with us. We'll take a complaint on the back of a napkin. We will take a complaint over the phone. We have a form that you can fill out. We will investigate if we have jurisdiction, and we will investigate whether we have jurisdiction if you reach out to us. So we really mean to be an active resource, and we try to make it as easy as possible to be able to get to us. And as Jocelyn said, if you get to us and you mean to be in someplace else, or you ought to be in someplace else, we will find a way to share it with the other resources in government. But we are here to make sure that civil rights are satisfied in every institution of education in the country, and we're very, very serious about that.
Thank you.
I too want to just again thank you for the work you do. You have no idea how much impact that work has on people's lives. Occasionally, I know because I'm a teacher most of the time, I'm just on leave in the government, students come back and tell you about the difference you've made, but for every student who does that, there are 100 other students that you made a difference for that you may never hear from again. So I want you to keep in mind that you are doing the Lord's work. You really are. We have your back. If you need to contact the Department of Justice in the Civil Rights Division, you can call the Department of Justice and they will route the call through. Or you can go online, www.justice.gov, click through to the Civil Rights Division, and if it's a claim about discrimination in a school, you can click through there to the Educational Opportunities section. If it's a claim that you've been discriminated against in your employment, you can click through to the Employment Litigation section. That, I should caution you, is only true if you work for public schools, state and local government, because we don't have jurisdiction over discrimination against private employers in the Justice Department. For that,
But
you
we
need to go to the people who aren't, or you need to go to people who aren't here on the stage if it's not a school, which is you go to the EEOC, which has offices all across the country, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. I guess I should say we don't look forward to hearing from you because, of course, we'd only hear from you if you had a problem. But we look forward to helping you if you do have a problem and you contact us.
Good spin.
Well, I mean, at the risk of being entirely repetitive, I just want to echo Catherine and Pam in thanking all of you for all the work that you do, and to thank you for your partnership with us, because hearing from you about your concerns, about the issues that arise in your communities, helps us to do our job better. And it is so critical that you are on the front lines of dealing with some of the most important civil rights issues that we face across the country today. If you would like to file a complaint with us, and again, we are the people who enforce the civil rights laws in the healthcare space, you can come to hhs.gov and click through to the Office for Civil Rights, and we have forms on our website. But I'd encourage you as well to be in touch if, for example, you would like us to come out and do training or public speaking. The government does a significant amount through the bully pulpit and through communicating through the megaphone that we are lucky enough to have about the importance of civil rights principles and the need for every institution to comply with the standards of the law. So there are numerous tools that we can use to help us all achieve the goals we all share. And I do encourage you to be in touch, because we are all partners in this work, and we very much look forward to continuing to do it with you.
Great. Thank you so much. So we're right at the hour. So I just want to thank each of you again for, number one, making the time to come here. I know you're each incredibly busy people, and the fact that you're here means so much. And also thank you for your brilliance and the passion you bring to the work, and also your good sense of humor, which was a lot of fun as well. I hope it wasn't too painful for you all. So please join me in thanking Catherine, Pam, and Jocelyn for being here today.